"If you don't like it, go live in the streets," my father snarled, his finger stabbing toward the front door on Thanksgiving night. He didn't know I'd just closed a deal that morning, pushing my yearly income to $25 million. In 3 weeks, they'd be begging to keep the house, a house they mortgaged using my forged signature. It all began with the silence around that awful, wobbly chair. Brielle Stanton, 33 years old, pulled my non-flashy but definitely expensive black SUV into the familiar driveway in Carmel, Indiana. The sky was the color of bruised slate, but the 2-story colonial house glowed with that perfect, buttery light of a magazine photo shoot. It smelled like Thanksgiving: cinnamon, nutmeg, the heavy, savory scent of roasted turkey, and the underlying sweetness of Mom's famous pumpkin pie. A symphony of manufactured warmth and laughter spilled from the half-open garage door, setting the stage for the yearly drama where I was always cast as the supporting character, the stain on the perfect family portrait. I was here, flying in from my Chicago penthouse, only to return to the place where I was perpetually the other daughter, the discarded image of success. Stepping inside, the air was thick with expectation and judgment. Relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins were already clustered in the living room, their voices hushed, expectant. I smiled, the practiced, tight smile of someone who knows she is walking into a courtroom where the verdict has already been decided. The long mahogany dining table was set with Mom's fine china, glistening under the amber chandelier. My place, as always, was relegated to the furthest corner, tucked up against the swinging door to the kitchen. It was an old, carved wooden chair, slightly shorter than the rest, and it had a maddening, persistent wobble. Every time I shifted my weight, it made a tiny grating sound that was amplified in the tense silence of the room. It was the perfect physical manifestation of my standing in the Stanton hierarchy. Centered at the table, radiating the golden glow of parental approval, sat my younger sister, Lauren Stanton, 3 years my junior and the family's reigning star. Beside her was her fiancé, Evan Price, who possessed the ability to laugh at precisely the right moment and nod with appropriate gravity, the perfect legal accessory. Lauren, a lawyer at the fictitious-sounding Marble and Crown Legal Group in Indianapolis, looked effortlessly chic in a creamy dress that seemed to absorb the light. The feast began, and with the carving of the turkey, the annual performance commenced. My mother, Diane, started the predictable flow of accolades, her voice carrying across the chatter. "Oh, Lauren is just doing so well," Mom chirped, directing the conversation toward an aunt who was prone to gossip. "They're talking about making her the youngest partner at Marble and Crown. Can you believe it? And the house they're building, 3,000 square feet, a dream home. The wedding planning is finally underway, too. It's going to be something special." She glanced down the table at me, then quickly back at the central figures, like a news anchor skipping over a less interesting segment. When the conversation stalled, she offered her half-hearted summary of my life. "And Brielle? Oh, she still does that. Something online. You know, she helps people with their little digital shops. I don't really understand it myself." The tone was dismissive, conveying to everyone that whatever I did was niche, incomprehensible, and certainly not something that would earn a spread in the local paper. My Aunt Susan, who had always viewed ambition as a hobby, leaned in across the salt shaker. "Still doing that little online service, dear? Like making personalized cards?" Her voice was sugary, the implication clear. This was a quaint, small-scale pursuit, like knitting or decoupage. I took a sip of water, feeling the familiar, tightening band around my chest. I swallowed the truth, a reality so vast it would rupture the carefully constructed bubble of this dinner. I wasn't designing personalized cards. I was the chief executive officer of 3 interconnected companies: Stanton Meridian Labs, North River Automation, and a quiet private investment fund that specialized in distressed tech assets. I employed over 120 people and, as of that morning, my yearly revenue had just secured its position north of $25 million. I nodded curtly and mumbled, "Something like that. Aunt Susan, Automation mostly. Lauren, however, wasn't done with me yet. She was the best at delivering a cold kill shot wrapped in a velvet glove of concern. She paused, placing her fork down delicately, ensuring she had the attention of the table. "It's truly disappointing, though, how far Sister has fallen behind," Lauren stated, loud enough for Grandpa in his hearing aid to catch it. 33 years old and still hasn't finished college. It's just baffling to me how someone can throw away that foundation. It makes it hard for us, you know? To explain that to Evan's parents. It's a matter of principle, honestly. The entire table fell into a painful, echoing silence. My grandparents looked away. My cousins suddenly found their turkey legs intensely fascinating. Not one person, not a single relative, opened their mouth to defend me, or even shift the conversation. Their silence was the collective endorsement of her judgment. It was the opening my father, Mark Stanton, had been waiting for. He set his knife and fork down on his plate with a sharp, metallic clink, the sound of a gavel striking wood. The annual Brielle assessment meeting had officially begun. Dad's face was already flushed, his tone calibrated for maximum impact. He didn't raise his voice, which made his words all the more chilling. He fixed his gaze on me, ignoring the rest of the table. "It's not just the college, Brielle," he said, his voice hard as tempered steel. "It's the fundamental refusal to grow up. You are selfish, impulsive. You refuse to listen to advice, and you chase these ridiculous, imaginary internet dreams. You have wasted every opportunity we gave you, chasing shadows instead of a legitimate career path." Mom, Diane, jumped in immediately, adding the necessary emotional layering. "Your father and I are exhausted. We are tired of pretending to our friends and family that you are doing fine when you are clearly not. It affects the family reputation. We worry constantly that you'll come to us, needing a bailout." It was the lie of the year. They hadn't worried about me in years. They worried about themselves and the narrative they controlled. Then, Dad stood up. He was a tall man, and standing over the table, with the golden light behind him, he looked monolithic and absolute. He pointed directly at the front door, his face a mask of cold finality. "Effective immediately. The financial support ends," he concluded, his voice shaking slightly, not from rage, but from the satisfaction of exercising control. "Live your life how you want. If you don't like our rules, then simply go live in the streets." I looked around one last time. Lauren's eyes were lowered, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Evan looked supremely uncomfortable, pretending to wipe his mouth. My grandmother wrung her hands. They all saw me condemned. A fierce, rebellious heat rose in my chest. I could have shattered the whole illusion right then. I could have stood on that wobbly chair and announced, "I earn more than all of you combined. I own the money you're talking about." But I stopped. They didn't deserve the full, clean truth. They deserved the slow burn of discovery. I pushed back the wobbly chair, the slight screech cutting through the silence. I stood up calmly, my spine straight. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not plead. I spoke only 3 words. "I understand." I turned, walked away from the table, and left the house without looking back. I left the scent of pumpkin pie, the buttery glow, and the entire family, the whole judgmental jury, sitting there, confident they had just erased me. The cold Indiana air hit me like a physical blow. I climbed into the driver's seat of the SUV, the expensive leather cold against my legs. I did not turn the key immediately. I just sat there, looking back at the house, at the window where my father now stood, silhouetted in the perfect warm yellow light. They told me to go live in the streets, I thought, my mind clear and sharp as a newly honed blade. They have no idea that in 3 weeks, this entire street will belong to the failure they just threw out. The promise of reversal hung heavy and absolute in the silent, freezing suburban night. The cold air of the SUV, the phantom echo of my father's cruel ultimatum, was the necessary jolt to trigger the past. The bitterness I felt wasn't sudden. It was the accumulation of years spent as the designated shadow, The sting of being told to go live in the streets only truly resonated because my life within those perfect walls had always felt like spiritual homelessness. This wasn't the origin of the wound. It was merely the final, infected closure. My mind slipped back to the Carmel of 15 and 16 years old, a period defined not by teenage angst, but by the relentless pursuit of an untouchable ideal. The Stanton house itself was a fortress of propriety. The manicured lawn looked permanently pressed, the brickwork was eternally clean, and every shrub was sculpted into submission. This wasn't a home. It was a curated exhibit, designed to garner the respect of the neighbors and the approval of Mark Stanton's colleagues at Evercrest Buildworks, the fictitious construction company where he was a project manager. Mark's obsession was hierarchy. He didn't just want success. He needed validation that he occupied the perfect middle ground, above the struggling, but securely below the nouveau riche. His business card, with his title etched in thick, serious font, held more emotional weight than any report card or childhood drawing. Our emotions, our desires, were secondary to the gaze of the neighborhood, the silent assessment of his peers. His greatest fear wasn't poverty, it was embarrassment. My mother, Diane, a nurse at the local school, was the master architect of the Stanton image. Her life wasn't governed by, "What does my daughter want?" but by the singular to powerful question, "What will people think?" Every decision, from the brand of car we drove to the color of the mulch, was a defensive maneuver, a shield designed to protect the fragile illusion of our perfect family. Her love felt conditional, perpetually tethered to how well we performed our roles in her public performance. Lauren, my younger sister, was the golden child, the centerpiece of the exhibit. She was the recipient of every educational, cultural, and material investment: violin lessons at the conservatory, week-long leadership camps, expensive tutors, and enrollment in the most prestigious private school in the area. Everything was poured into her with the understanding that her achievements were the family's glory. Each A+, each debate club victory, was not just an accomplishment, but a preordained step toward a brilliant destiny, cementing the Stanton legacy. And then there was me. While Lauren was mastering Vivaldi, I was in my room, usually on the floor, surrounded by tangled wires and glowing circuits. My affinity for computers, for taking apart old Dell towers and writing simple lines of code, was seen as a quirky habit that needed to be outgrown. I spent hours on early tech forums and started taking on small local jobs, fixing a small hair salon's shoddy website, or helping the downtown pet store figure out how to take online orders. I was paid a pittance, but the process of building something functional from nothing was pure, unadulterated joy. To my parents, this was a distraction, an eccentric refusal to follow the established blueprint. Dinner time was ritualized. It was never about the food. It was the daily debriefing. Lauren would recount her triumphs: the lead role in the school play, the perfect score on the advanced placement exam, or her masterful guidance of the debate club to a regional win. My parents would toast her success with sparkling cider, a silent coronation. The air crackled with pride, directed entirely at her. One evening, when I was about 16, I found the courage to speak up during a rare lull. "I finished that e-commerce site for Mrs. Henderson's Bakery," I announced, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "She paid me $150, and her sales went up 20% this week." My mother put down her glass so quickly the ice chimed. Her eyes were sharp, bordering on panic. "Brielle, please," she cut in, a severe whisper of warning. "Do not boast about that. It sounds cheap. It sounds small. We don't discuss haggling for $150 at the dinner table." The message was deafening. My effort was vulgar. My legitimate work was an embarrassing anecdote. Lauren, the true master manipulator, never needed to be overtly cruel. Her weapon was quiet compliance, always positioning herself as the moral standard. She would look at me with a soft, practiced pity, a glance that communicated deep, sorrowful understanding. She would say, in a voice gentle enough to sound helpful. "Sister, you know you'd be fine if you just listened to Mom and Dad. They just want what's best." Her innate obedience was the yardstick against which my rebellion was perpetually measured and found wanting. She was the model, and I was the essential foil, the background against which her perfection shone brighter. The abuse in the Stanton house was not physical. There were no raised hands, no shouting matches, nothing that would leave a visible mark. The harm came entirely from words, glances, omission, and placement. It was the wobbly chair at the dinner table. It was the way Diane would crop me out of a family photo displayed on the mantelpiece, claiming the lighting was better with just the three of them. It was the conversation that was simply not had, the question about my life that was never asked. I was not abused. I was edited. The conversation that truly forged the steel in my resolve happened the night before my high school graduation. I was supposed to be asleep, but I was wide awake, obsessively writing the first lines of code for a complex inventory tracker. I heard muffled voices from the kitchen. I crept to the top of the stairs, close enough to distinguish the words of my parents. My father's voice, low and weary, sighed. "Lauren is our pride. We did it right with her. She is going to make us so proud at that law firm." My mother responded, her voice tight with relief. "She is our masterpiece, Mark." She secured the image. As for Brielle, she paused, and I braced myself for the verbal stab. "As for Brielle, we just need her to not disgrace the family. As long as she doesn't do anything that causes a scandal, we've done our job. As long as she doesn't disgrace the family." That sentence was the final judgment, the verbal frame they built around my life. It meant I was not expected to succeed, only to be harmless. I was not supposed to contribute to the family's narrative, only to avoid ruining theirs. I backed away from the stairs, not crying, but feeling a profound, ice-cold clarity. They didn't see me as a person with potential. I was a reputation risk. Standing there, in the quiet suburban night of my perfectly maintained childhood home, I realized that my greatest success would have to be an act of defiance, a life built entirely outside their frame. The foundation for the Thanksgiving confrontation, years later, was set right then. I would become the person they feared, the one who could never be controlled by the fragile, perfect image they sought to protect. The transition from the rigid perfection of the Stanton home to the sprawling, thus anonymous campus of the State University felt less like freedom and more like being fitted into a slightly larger, yet equally suffocating, cage. My parents, Mark and Diane, had decreed the path. Business administration at a reputable public institution in Indiana. This was, in their eyes, the singular, acceptable road to success, a tangible degree, a verifiable credential that protected their image. Anything else was chaos, failure, or, worst of all, an invitation for neighbors to whisper. I tried. I genuinely tried to be the obedient daughter they envisioned. I attended every lecture in the cavernous halls, my notebook filled with meticulous, color-coded notes on SWOT analyses and supply chain logistics. I dutifully applied for, and secured, an internship at a local bank, spending my afternoons in a cubicle filing documents and fetching coffee. But sitting in those classes, listening to professors drone on about 30-year-old case studies, I felt an intense, physical suffocation. I was a human photocopier, mindlessly transcribing theory. The material was abstract, detached from the urgent, messy reality of commerce I was already experiencing. The irony was palpable. They were teaching us how to manage a business, while I was, in secret, already building one. No one in my circle, not my classmates, not my academic advisor, certainly not my family, knew that beneath the surface of the diligent student, I was quietly constructing the online storefront for a small, independent bakery 3 towns over. This wasn't a class assignment. This was real, gritty work involving inventory management, payment gateways, and figuring out why her cookies weren't showing up correctly on mobile. The few $100s I earned was secondary to the deep satisfaction of watching something work. Then came the side project, initially just for fun, a scratch to an itch. I started coding a tiny, elegant tool designed to automate customer relationship emails for small online shops. It wasn't a massive system. It just ensured that if someone bought a specific item, they'd get a perfectly timed follow-up email offering a related product or a discount coupon. The tool exploded in a small, unexpected way. Word spread on early forums for independent sellers. Suddenly, a few $100s became a few $1,000s in just a matter of 4 or 5 months. That number, a few $1,000s, comfortably surpassed what I earned during my meticulously planned bank internship. It was revenue earned from creation, not from serving time in a cubicle. I began living 2 parallel lives. By day, I was Brielle Stanton, the business admin student, listening to lectures on marketing principles I knew were already obsolete. I forced myself to sit through classes until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, absorbing just enough information to pass the next exam. By night, I transformed. My tiny, sterile dorm room became a glowing cockpit. My desk was a landscape of 3 cheap monitors duct-taped together, and my diet was fueled by instant ramen and cheap coffee. I was connecting with clients across different time zones, troubleshooting bugs for a candle maker in California, or tweaking code for a vintage clothes seller in Brooklyn. I regularly worked until 3 in the morning, living by the chaotic, exhilarating clock of the internet, not the structured schedule of academia. My parents remained blissfully ignorant, viewing my college enrollment as a sacred badge of honor, proof that they had steered their eldest daughter back onto the right course. Whenever I dared to bring up the success of my software, my father, Mark, would dismiss it with a patronizing scoff. "You made a few pennies, Brielle," he'd say, a cold, dry laugh escaping him. "It'll fizzle out in a few weeks. You're hallucinating if you think that's a real career. Don't be delusional." His skepticism didn't hurt as much as it had when I was 16. Now, it was just fuel. By the second year of college, the income generated from my night project had silently eclipsed the starting salary many of my peers were striving for. I was getting cold calls, not from clients, but from small tech startups. One firm in Denver reached out with a genuine proposal to either acquire the tool outright or offer a substantial cooperation agreement. The climax of this internal war happened in the dim, stale air of the university's main library. I was alone, hunched over my laptop, facing 2 competing screens. On the left was my end-of-semester exam schedule: Marketing 7200, Accounting 3001, Business Law. On the right was an immaculate Excel spreadsheet detailing my growing revenue, projection models for the next quarter, and the Denver startup's offer. The choice was suddenly stark, terrifyingly simple. Continuing with college was a commitment not to my future, but to the preservation of my parents' image. The degree was a worthless piece of paper to me. Its only value lay in the silence it bought at the Stanton dinner table. I closed the exam schedule. The decision was made, not with a bang, but with the quiet, absolute clarity of someone stepping off a predetermined path. I would quit. I would move to a small, affordable apartment in the vast, unforgiving sprawl of suburban Chicago, where I knew no one, and dedicate myself entirely to the automation tools I was building for e-commerce. The ensuing confrontation in the family kitchen was the final explosion. I drove back to Carmel that weekend and delivered the news. My father's face went crimson, a horrifying mix of rage and perceived betrayal. My mother, Diane, turned pale, her hands flying to her chest in a gesture of absolute dramatic horror. Lauren remained silent, but I caught the quick, satisfied flicker in her eyes. The perfect negative example had finally materialized. My failure was now official, tangible proof of her virtue. They didn't resort to physical violence, but the words they chose were precise and devastating, aimed right at my deepest insecurity, my self-worth. "You are self-destructing your entire life," Mark roared, his voice low and vibrating with menace. "You have no discipline. We paid for this. We sacrificed for this. And you throw it away for some childish game." Diane wrung her hands. "How could you do this to us? What are we supposed to tell people? will be humiliated. You will end up destitute. This is betrayal." I stood there, calm and strangely unmoved. The years of emotional editing had prepared me for this. Their anger wasn't about my future. It was about their social standing. I walked out of that house an hour later with a single, battered suitcase and the laptop that held my entire future. I left the diplomas, the childhood photos, the entire history of Brielle Stanton, the obedient daughter, behind. Standing on the immaculate sidewalk of Carmel, I looked back at the house that had just ejected me. I made a silent vow that became the bedrock of my resilience. I would rather eat instant noodles for a whole year than ever come back to this town and ask for one single dollar from anyone here. I drove toward Chicago, toward the tiny apartment waiting for me, choosing poverty and potential brilliance over comfort and guaranteed mediocrity. The college dropout was now truly free and utterly alone to build her own life. The apartment I landed in, nestled in the vast, gray outer suburbs of Chicago, was exactly what I could afford. A shoebox. It was so small that the kitchen was touching the living room, and the living room dissolved seamlessly into my designated workspace. I used a rickety second-hand dresser as a divider, a symbolic, futile attempt to separate work from life. The walls were paper-thin. The appliances looked like museum pieces, but it had two saving graces: reliably fast Wi-Fi and enough electrical outlets to power my multi-monitor setup. It was a physical manifestation of my life. Cramped, ugly, but perfectly wired for the future. This was my startup in the shadows. For the first year, I ground. My days were dedicated to the fringe economy of online freelancing. I took on the jobs that paid the bills, the ones my parents would have scorned as cheap labor. I learned to be fast and ruthlessly efficient. I fixed broken shop themes for boutique flower shops, punched out email content for pet supply stores, and built simple, functional sales funnels for local nail salons. These were low-dollar, high-volume gigs, but they paid on time, and that consistent transactional flow was the lifeblood keeping me alive and off the ramen diet. My nights, however, were reserved for the real work. I was obsessively coding and refining my proprietary platform, which I branded FluxCart Automator. It was designed as an intelligent retention system for small and medium-sized Shopify stores. Its goal was simple: stop customers from drifting away. It sent perfectly timed follow-up emails, suggested smart product upsells based on past behavior, and most importantly, consolidated scattered customer data into actionable insights. It was the future of personalized e-commerce, built by a college dropout in a room the size of a walk-in closet. I wish I could tell you there was a single, magical aha moment where the money started flowing. There wasn't. The first 6 months were a continuous, exhausting battle against technology and my own inexperience. It was bug after bug, followed by clients dropping off, frustrated by initial instability. I remember one crushing incident where the entire server crashed on Black Friday, the single most important retail day of the year. I spent 36 hours straight frantically patching the code, simultaneously issuing profuse apologies and full refunds, and watching my tiny bank account dwindle. It was a baptism by fire that taught me the brutal realities of uptime and scale. Then came Aurora Veil Skincare, a small, struggling cosmetics company based in Colorado. They were in dire straits. Their website was a labyrinth. Their checkout process was confusing. They had 0 customer care emails, and their data was fragmented across 3 different spreadsheets. They came to me because they were drowning and had nothing left to lose. I looked at their business, saw the genuine quality of their product, and realized they had a huge, fixable technology problem, not a marketing one. I proposed a structure that was highly unusual at the time: a low fixed retainer, enough to cover my ramen budget, plus a percentage of all revenue increase if they crossed a specific, predetermined threshold. Everyone else in the industry would have called me insane for hitching my future to a sinking ship. I called it betting on my own code. For 9 solid months, I ate, slept, and breathed Aurora Veil Skincare. I implemented FluxCart Automator, redesigned their checkout flow to reduce friction, and most critically, designed a completely automated, personalized email sequence that nurtured every lead and retained every purchaser. The result was indisputable. Their monthly revenue increased 5 times over. It was a staggering success story, powered entirely by the automated infrastructure I had designed. The day the first substantial revenue share hit my personal account, I was sitting on the ugly linoleum floor of my kitchen, eating instant noodles. It wasn't just a few $100s. It was a figure that represented a fundamental shift in my life. I stared at the screen, and I didn't cheer or jump. I just slumped back against the baseboard and laughed until tears streamed down my face. It was the first time I had cried not out of sadness, but out of the sheer, quiet terror that my gamble had paid off. That case study changed everything. The reputation of the mysterious Chicago girl who saved online shops with code spread like wildfire through the small founder community. I stopped having to chase clients. They were flooding my inbox. My Zoom calls started stacking up across multiple time zones. To manage the legal and financial structure of my burgeoning empire, I formally incorporated. First came Stanton Meridian Labs, which was the legal structure for the FluxCart intellectual property and development. Then I spun off North River Automation, focused solely on integrating the software and optimizing digital advertising flows for mid-sized e-commerce brands. Finally, I established a quiet consulting arm that worked exclusively with brands looking to scale their annual revenue from the 6-figure bracket up to the 8-figure mark. By the time I was 30 years old, the frantic hustle had morphed into something stable and highly profitable. My personal income, after taxes and all necessary investment back into the companies, was securely positioned around $25 million annually. I had successfully transitioned from being a college dropout coding in a glorified closet to becoming a major player in the automation space, a power I exerted quietly, anonymously, from the top of the Chicago financial world. But in Carmel, Indiana, at the Stanton House, I was still the same person I had been when I walked out. To Mark and Diane, I was merely the college dropout doing that online thing, the financial nonentity who had yet to disgrace their name publicly. The disparity between my immense, silent success and their persistent, dismissive narrative was the fundamental injustice that made the coming revenge feel not just necessary, but deeply cathartic. They hadn't cut me out of the family. They had cut themselves off from reality. The transition from the cold, suburban night of Carmel to the sterile, vertical luxury of my Chicago penthouse, overlooking a vast Gray Lake, Michigan, should have been a relief. But the silence in the 2,000-square-foot apartment was deafening. I returned to walls of glass and Italian leather, surrounded by every comfort I had ever worked for, only to feel the deepest sense of isolation. I had been waiting, almost robotically, for the inevitable text message. Not an apology, of course, but the obligatory, "Did you make it back okay?" Or the terse, "Call us when you can." The message that acknowledged I was still, despite everything, their daughter. The phone remained a dark, unresponsive slate for an entire week. No calls, no texts, no emails, not from Mark, not from Diane, and certainly not from the self-satisfied silence of Lauren. The family had not merely kicked me out, they had unanimously excised me. I had been successfully removed from the current narrative. The first crack in the silence came from a source I hadn't expected. My cousin, Megan Hart, who, despite her proximity to the Stanton drama, possessed a genuinely kind heart. "Brielle, are you okay?" Megan's text arrived late one Tuesday morning. "I know Thanksgiving was tough, but I heard Mom talking. I had to check." I texted back, "I'm fine, Megan. Why? What did you hear?" The reply dropped the bomb with casual cruelty. "She told the prayer group that you're couch surfing with friends in Chicago because your online project finally failed, and you're struggling to make rent. She said to keep you in their prayers." I stopped breathing. I was reading the words, "couch surfing because your project failed," while sitting in my custom-designed office chair, overlooking a 3-screen dashboard that displayed real-time revenue streams flowing into my 3 companies. The irony was so profound, it bordered on the absurd. A painful, hollow laugh escaped me. It wasn't just painful. It was the searing sting of betrayal that came from realizing they weren't just angry. They were actively defaming me. Megan, sensing my stunned silence, followed up with a picture. A candid snapshot taken with a cell phone camera. It showed Mom, Diane, standing in the center of a circle of women at the local church. Her hands dramatically placed over her heart. She was a picture of virtuous suffering. In the picture, Diane was clearly recounting the story of her wayward, headstrong daughter who refused to return to decent education. It was a meticulously crafted performance, designed not to elicit help for me, but to harvest sympathy and admiring nods for her own enduring suffering as a mother. She needed my failure to validate her narrative of tireless, martyred parenthood. The social media cleanup was swift and brutal. I logged onto Instagram, only to find Lauren's post. A perfectly staged Thanksgiving photo with her, Evan, Mark, and Diane, standing in front of the roaring fireplace. The caption read, "So grateful for family and new beginnings." My entire existence had been wiped clean from the frame, rendered a digital non-event. It was an efficient social media excision, a public declaration that the family unit was tighter, smaller, and more perfect without me. The verbal violence continued as the story permeated the peripheral social circles. A friend of Lauren's, a woman I had known since childhood, tagged me in a story, writing, "Shocked to hear about your sister. Hard to believe some adults still refuse to grow up and get their lives together." Lauren's reply? A simple, smug, eye-rolling emoji. I finally put the phone down, the glossy screen reflecting my own cold face. The realization settled in, heavy and absolute. I had not merely been told to live in the streets. I was being intentionally and maliciously rewritten as a cautionary moral tale for their community. I was the family's latest, cheapest sermon. The feeling that overcame me was no longer sadness or even anger. It was a cold, pure recognition of their true nature. They didn't just tolerate my failures. They needed them. My parents required me to be unstable, unsuccessful, and desperately reliant on them, because that role secured their self-righteous position in Carmel society. My hidden success was a threat to their entire identity as the long-suffering, respectable Stantons. While my personal world felt like it was crumbling inward, the outer world, the one I had built, ran with precise, brutal efficiency. I was on a 9 a.m. video conference with my European development team, followed by a 1 p.m. call with my CFO regarding Q1 projections, and deep in final preparations for the launch of a major new automation product. My external life was polished, flawless, and generating revenue at a staggering velocity. But internally, something had snapped. The final frail string of hope, the belief that deep down, they still cared for me beyond the facade, was now irrevocably severed. The emotional buffer was gone, replaced by a crystalline resolve. The game wasn't about proving I was wealthy. It was about forcing the consequences of their deliberate cruelty back onto their own doorstep, and ensuring the story they fabricated about me became irrevocably linked to the truth of their own actions. The revenge was now purely existential. I had to stop them from using me to define themselves. The Monday morning following Thanksgiving week felt unnervingly calm. I was deep in a flow state, reviewing analytics, when my primary business email pinged with a message that instantly fractured the professional silence of my office. The sender was a mid-sized law firm in Indianapolis I had never heard of. The subject line was terse, formal, and alarming. Action required. Co-guarantor. Confirmation on residential property loan refinance. I almost dismissed it as sophisticated spam, but as I scanned the text, the details were too specific. The name of the bank, the 7-digit loan reference code, and the exact street address of my parents' house in Carmel. The letter requested I confirm my continued status as a co-guarantor on a loan taken out nearly 2 years ago for the amount of $420,000. I immediately put through a call. bypassing the generic line and insisting on speaking directly with the paralegal listed on the document. My voice was calm, controlled, betraying none of the cold, spreading dread I felt. "I am Brielle Stanton," I stated, my tone firm. "I received a confusing email. I need you to confirm the details of the loan and my purported role." The paralegal, a young man named Josh, pulled up the digital file. His voice was slightly hesitant as he confirmed the data. "Yes, Ms. Stanton, this is a home improvement and equity loan secured 23 months ago. The stated purpose was home expansion and capital for family business ventures. It is signed by Mark Stanton, Diane Stanton, and a co-guarantor, Brielle Stanton. The loan is currently nearing a default threshold, which triggers the co-guarantor review." Co-guarantor. I had signed nothing. I had been out of that house and financially cut off for years. "I need a scan of the original document, specifically the signature page," I instructed, my voice flat. "Email it to me now." When the scanned PDF appeared on my screen, I zoomed in. There it was. My name, written in a stylized script that was perhaps 80% accurate. The person who had done this had practiced. They had nailed the general loop of the capital B and the characteristic curl of the S, but I knew my own signature better than anyone. There was a slight tremor in the downstrokes of the LLE and a cramped stiffness in the tail of the N that betrayed a hand unfamiliar with the motion. Someone had been asked to, or forced to, forge my name. Before I could even process the full scope of the financial fraud, Megan's name flashed across my phone screen. "Brielle, just heard something else crazy." Her text read, "Dad Mark was bragging at the country club luncheon about how, thanks to family unity and shrewd investing, they had the funds to finish the renovation and, get this, help Lauren open her own full-service law office downtown. He called it family financing." The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The $420,000 loan, the stated purpose, home expansion and capital for family business. Lauren's recent smug posts about the forthcoming Lauren Stanton Legal Studio, a fantasy law firm she likely needed seed money for. My parents had used the house equity, leveraged their financial need, and, critically, dragged my name into the paperwork to secure the money they needed. Knowing that a successful, financially liquid co-guarantor was likely required for such a large sum, they leveraged the very daughter they had cast out as a failure. This was no longer a personal feud or simple emotional manipulation. This was a felony. I immediately contacted my corporate lawyer in Chicago, Kara Holden, a razor-sharp specialist who handled complex financial litigation and mergers. I forwarded the document and summarized the facts in a concise, logical memo. Kara's response was immediate and devoid of sentiment. "Brielle, this is signature fraud, identity theft, and criminal forgery, full stop. It directly compromises your credit history and exposes you to a debt you are not legally responsible for, but are financially tied to." The next 48 hours were a frantic, forensic deep dive. Kara immediately filed a formal complaint of fraudulent signature with the Indiana law firm and the lending bank, demanding a full handwriting analysis and, chillingly, video camera footage from the bank on the date the loan was officially signed. Simultaneously, she initiated a total credit freeze across all 3 major reporting bureaus linked to my Social Security number, preventing any further financial liabilities from being accrued in my name. But the investigation went deeper. At Kara's suggestion, I hired a specialist forensic accountant to conduct a deep audit of my entire credit history. The preliminary findings were a gut punch. A separate, unauthorized credit card with a $30,000 limit had been opened in my name in Indiana, completely unknown to me. The recent transaction history showed a clear pattern of purchases for high-end office furniture, computer equipment, and lease deposits, all correlating exactly with the projected needs of a startup legal practice. Lauren's golden path was being paved with my stolen identity. Then came the true, icy twist that transformed the situation from mere fraud into systematic exploitation. The forensic accountant flagged an oddity related to the estate of my maternal grandmother. Years ago, my grandmother, recognizing my early ambition, had established a small, private trust fund, intended, according to her wishes, for the granddaughter who proves her self-reliance. It should have been solely in my name, Brielle Stanton. The accountant discovered that Mark, years after Grandma's passing, had restructured the trust, officially retitling it as a shared fund for the educational expenses of both daughters. He had essentially hijacked my legacy to shore up the family's assets. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a reckless, one-time mistake where they borrowed my signature in a panic. This was a calculated financial system, a pattern of deliberate exploitation where I, the supposed failure, was simultaneously their invisible financial resource and their unlimited liability buffer, all designed to ensure the success and stability of their golden child. Lauren, they hadn't just kicked me out. They had tried to steal my future to finance the perfect life they wanted for her. The time for reconciliation was over. The time for systemic correction had begun. The night I fully grasped the extent of the fraud, the forged signature, the pilfered trust fund, the unauthorized credit card used to fund Lauren's ambition, was the night the last vestiges of the victim inside me died. I did not spend the evening weeping or raging. I was cold, intensely focused, and absolutely lethal. I opened my laptop to a fresh, blank file and typed one word in capital letters: plan. This was not about immediate, emotional retribution. This was about systemic protection and the precise, clinical application of consequence. The goal was to ensure the fallout of their actions, the debt, the financial instability, the eventual loss of status, circled back to rest squarely on the shoulders of the people who had created the disaster. Phase 1. Legal fortification. My corporate lawyer, Kara Holden, worked through the night. The first action was the formal submission of the fraud complaint, demanding the immediate suspension of the $420,000 loan. We filed injunctions requesting the handwriting analysis be performed by an independent state laboratory and, most critically, moved to quash any future financial document that dared to bear my name. Mark and Diane would find that my name, once a convenient tool, was now a locked vault sealed by a team of high-priced attorneys. Phase 2. Financial reconnaissance. The forensic accountant shifted his focus from my compromised credit to my parents' actual solvency. The picture that emerged was predictably shaky. My father's small construction venture, Stanton Home Projects, was hemorrhaging money, showing consistent, multi-year losses and a worrying backlog of unpaid suppliers. Their primary mortgage on the house, separate from the fraudulent home equity loan, was dangerously close to the default threshold. They weren't wealthy suburbanites. They were high-risk gamblers banking on the hope that the family financing would somehow materialize into profit. Phase 3. Absolute identity lockdown. I personally oversaw the digital quarantine of my entire financial life. I enforced a total credit freeze, changed every single password on every account, and activated two-factor authentication on everything from my email to my investment portfolios. More symbolically, I systematically purged every single address, phone number, and account linked to Carmel, Indiana, from my banking system. I established a custom alert system that would flag any transaction attempted using my name or social security number within a 500-mile radius of Indianapolis. They would never be able to use me, financially or digitally, again. Just as this cold, logical framework was being put into place, a separate, monumental opportunity landed on my desk. A distressed real estate investment fund operating across the Midwest, Heartland Recovery Partners, reached out, seeking a major strategic investor to help restructure and scale their operations. Their business model was brutally simple and highly profitable: acquire non-performing loans and distressed assets, properties on the verge of foreclosure, restructure the debt, and then flip the assets for profit. During my initial diligence, reviewing the fund's acquisition targets, I saw it. tucked deep within the list of potential assets available for purchase by the fund was the specific, suspended loan associated with Mark and Diane's property. The package included their primary residence in Carmel, the physical infrastructure, a separate warehouse and small office, used by Stanton Home Projects, and even a secondary lien related to the lease for Lauren's ill-fated law office. All of it was being flagged by the bank as a distressed asset if the debt wasn't promptly serviced. I brought the information to Kara, my pulse steady despite the emotional gravity of the discovery. Kara, ever the pragmatist, leaned back in her chair. Legally, Brielle, this is a clean slate. You are within your rights to invest in any fund you choose. The bank is legally obliged to sell off the debt to the highest bidder if it's not serviced. This is a commercial transaction. No one forced them to take out the loan, and no one forced them to forge your signature. I wrestled with the decision, sitting silently for a long time, staring out at the Chicago skyline. Was this too much? Was I stepping across the line from self-defense to malicious destruction? Or was I simply allowing the natural consequence of their financial recklessness to play out, while ensuring my own survival? The answer lay in the memory of the wobbly chair, the "go live in the streets" command, and the smug pity in Lauren's eyes. They had gambled their home and my identity on their self-serving ambition. The ethical line, I realized, was crossed the moment they picked up the pen to sign my name. My action now was simply to control the landing. I agreed to the strategic investment in Heartland Recovery Partners. My condition was precise. I would invest a sum large enough, multiple millions of dollars, to grant me absolute veto power over any asset acquisition related to the Carmel area. My identity, however, had to remain strictly confidential in all public and internal fund documentation. I would be the silent controller, the beneficial owner of the coming transaction. Simultaneously, in a separate, quiet act of profound significance, I dramatically increased the funding for a major Chicago-based initiative. It was a program dedicated to securing housing and providing vocational training for homeless youth and young adults, those who had literally been told to go live in the streets. This project, which would soon be my quiet focus, would become the ultimate, tangible cost of the cruel words my father spoke that Thanksgiving night. The stage was set, the contracts were signed, and the cold, precise clock of financial collapse was ticking down in Indiana. The invitation had arrived a week after the legal proceedings began. A heavy embossed card from the Lighthouse Futures Foundation, one of Chicago's premier nonprofits. They were hosting their annual year-end gala and wished to honor their anonymous benefactor, the one who had funded the construction of 2 youth housing centers and established a substantial technology scholarship fund for vulnerable young adults. Initially, I planned to decline. The spotlight had always been antithetical to my business strategy. My $25 million empire was built on quiet efficiency, not public fanfare. But the recent events, the callous expulsion on Thanksgiving, the malicious prayer group rumors, and the criminal financial fraud, had changed the equation. My identity had been hijacked and weaponized in the suburbs of Indiana. It was time for the true Brielle Stanton to appear on a stage worthy of her efforts, not in the distorted, pitiful narrative being spun in the Carmel church circles. Unbeknownst to me, a peculiar confluence of events was unfolding 180 miles away. A well-meaning friend of my mother, a woman named Carol, who sat on a subcommittee for a minor sponsor of the Lighthouse Gala, had received a pair of extra tickets. Carol, thrilled by the promise of elite networking, had enthusiastically offered the tickets to Mark and Diane, insisting they bring Lauren and Evan. "It's where all the big tech money is," she had gushed. "It will be excellent exposure for Lauren's new law firm." The Stantons, blinded by the potential for climbing the social ladder, had accepted immediately. None of them, of course, had any idea who the secretive benefactor was. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of a legendary downtown Chicago hotel. The scene was cinematic, shimmering with crystal chandeliers and a sea of sleek black tuxedos and designer gowns. White-gloved waiters moved seamlessly among tables draped in pristine linen. This was the exact, rarefied atmosphere of success. a room packed with venture capitalists, influential politicians, and technology titans. The social strata Mark and Diane had only ever seen on television. This was the place they had aspired to, but could never quite reach. I walked in precisely on time. My dress was a simple, impeccably tailored black sheath, striking but understated. My hair was pulled back, my makeup minimal but sharp. I chose my company deliberately. My chief financial officer, Peter, and my oldest, most trusted friend from my scrappy dorm days. I did not bring a date, nor did I come with family, reinforcing the image of total, independent self-sufficiency. From a distance, across the vast, polished floor, I saw them. Mark was rigid in a rented tuxedo, constantly adjusting his tie. Diane kept nervously patting her carefully selected strand of pearls. Lauren, radiant in a vivid, crimson gown, was deep in conversation with a couple at her table, no doubt elaborating on the supposed bright future of the Lauren Stanton legal studio. They were animated, confident, perfectly playing the part of the respectable, aspirational Midwestern family. They were so focused on the idea of who they hoped to meet that they entirely missed me, the specter of their past, standing 50 feet away. The MC, the famous news anchor David Reynolds, took the stage, bringing the room to silence. The moment had arrived. He began the introduction with an arc of suspense. Tonight, we honor someone who exemplifies true success coupled with genuine humility. She is a female founder, still under the age of 35, who built a transformative e-commerce automation empire without a dime of venture capital funding. Her revenue is now well into the 8-figure range, over $25 million annually. Yet she has spent years fiercely guarding her anonymity. I saw Mark turn to Lauren, whispering loudly, a flicker of genuine respect in his voice. "See, Lauren, young women really are doing amazing things these days. You need to meet her." He still hadn't connected the name to the narrative. Reynolds smiled, his voice soaring with dramatic flair. "She made a fortune from the internet, but chose to deploy it to lift up those in true need. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and join me in celebrating the person who has helped hundreds of young adults, many of whom were told to go live in the streets, find shelter, skills, and a path forward. Please welcome to the stage, Brielle Stanton." The spotlight snapped from the stage and pinned me precisely where I stood. As I slowly rose, the sound of 1,000 people standing and applauding washed over the ballroom. Across the room, the tableau of the Stanton family shattered. Mark's jaw dropped, his hand frozen mid-gesture toward the table. Diane went from pale to ashen, her fingers clutching her pearls, as if they were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Lauren's brilliant red gown suddenly looked cheap and aggressive. They were trapped, forced to watch the supposed couch-surfing failure ascend to the stage of the highest echelon of Chicago society. The people at their table, hearing the surname, looked from the stage back to the horrified faces of the Stantons, and a ripple of recognition and silent, delicious judgment spread through the cluster. The low murmur of professional conversation instantly ceased. I took the microphone. In my acceptance speech, I was careful not to name names, but I chose my words with surgical precision, speaking directly to the painful irony of my life. "There are children," I said, my voice clear and steady, "who grow up in houses that are perfectly clean, where the grass is always manicured, but where every day they are told, implicitly or explicitly, you will never amount to anything. There are people, sometimes the ones we love most, who look at us and tell us, 'Go live in the streets.'" I paused, letting the implication hang in the dead air. The mission of this foundation is simple: to transform those very streets into a safe harbor where other young people can be rescued, trained, and rebuilt, because the person who tells you to fail does not get to determine your worth. The applause that followed was thunderous, fueled by admiration and the underlying shock of the unmasking. Mark stood hunched, his head lowered in humiliation. Diane was blinking rapidly, tears welling up, a confusion of shame and possessive pride warring on her face. Lauren, for the first time in her life, bit her lips so hard she looked like she might draw blood. She finally understood that the little online thing she ridiculed was a self-made multi-million-dollar force, an empire built by the sister she had been conditioned to pity. As I stepped off the stage, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Diane, obviously sent the moment the realization hit her. "Daughter, why did you never tell us? Your father and I are so incredibly proud of you." I looked at the message, the desperate, clawing attempt to reassert control over the narrative and claim ownership of my success. I held the phone for a long moment, then simply locked the screen, dropping it into my clutch. No reply. The time for communication was over. The time for consequence was imminent. The gala had been the public unmasking, the final act of control. The structural collapse of their financial existence came 3 weeks later. The email from Kara was brief and transactional, a lawyer's surgical report. The $420,000 loan on the Carmel residence had officially defaulted. The bank, adhering to its terms, had packaged and sold the debt to the highest bidder. That bidder, predictably, was Heartland Recovery Partners, the distressed asset fund where I held the controlling investment. The entire asset package now rested under my silent purview. This acquisition was comprehensive. It included the house, the small warehouse and office space used by Stanton Home Projects, and a specific, secondary lien attached to the lease agreement for Lauren's nascent legal office. Through a maze of corporate subsidiaries and legal entities, I became the beneficial owner, the quiet force behind the shell company now administering the assets. On paper, it was a routine foreclosure acquisition. In reality, I owned the keys to their kingdom. There would be no dramatic return to Carmel. No shouting match on the manicured lawn. The end would be conducted with the precise, icy formality they valued above all else. I dispatched an official, terse letter on the impressive letterhead of Heartland Recovery Partners' managing entity. The letter invited Mark, Diane, and Lauren to a mandatory meeting at the fund's executive offices in downtown Chicago to discuss the resolution of the non-performing asset portfolio and related legal liabilities concerning the defaulted Stanton loan. They flew in, not in the triumphant manner of the Thanksgiving trip, but with a palpable mixture of mounting dread and frantic, desperate hope. Mark was trying to project command, Diane was teary and manic, and Lauren kept repeating, "We're lawyers, Dad. We can negotiate this. They can't just bully us." She still believed the possession of a law degree provided immunity from financial reality. The meeting took place in the fund's sleek, glass-walled conference room, high above the river. Everything was cold, minimalist, and expensive, a deliberate contrast to the cozy, overstuffed perfection of their home. There was an automated espresso machine hissing softly in the corner, and a view that extended for hundreds of miles, emphasizing their sudden smallness. Kara, sitting opposite them, opened the proceedings with the factual gravity of a prosecutor. She confirmed the preliminary findings. The signature fraud was verified by 2 independent forensic reports. If my client, Ms. Stanton, chooses to pursue this, the evidence supports a criminal investigation into identity theft and forgery, Kara stated, her voice even. "We are only here today because she is offering an alternative to criminal prosecution." I remained silent, allowing the weight of the moment and Kara's clinical delivery to settle. Then, I slid a single, thick folder across the polished table. Inside were the facts they could no longer deny. The high-resolution scans of the forged signature, the official handwriting analysis report, the credit card statement showing specific charges for Lauren's office furniture, and the damning flowchart illustrating how the $420,000 loan money was funneled directly into Stanton Home Projects and various associated personal accounts. Diane immediately launched into trembling denial. "This is a misunderstanding. The bank made an error. Brielle, darling, this is just a little paperwork mix-up." Mark, his face pale and slick with sweat, mumbled about Unforeseen business setbacks. Lauren tried to argue that the bank had misfiled the co-guarantor waiver. Kara cut through their flimsy excuses, pointing to the documents with cold precision. We have ATM camera footage that directly correlates with the date the funds were withdrawn for the furniture. We have the metadata from the electronic documents. The layer of plausible deniability is exhausted. The excuses ran out like water draining from a broken dam. It was time for the final, devastating logic bomb. I spoke for the first time, my voice low and completely devoid of emotion. You have two options, I stated, pushing two folders marked A and B across the table toward them. Option A, you sign over the entire asset package, the house, the warehouse, the associated liens, to the fund for a nominal price, which we will use to settle the full value of the defaulted loan and fees. You walk away with a zero balance on the debt, and I sign a non-prosecution agreement regarding the criminal forgery. Mark gasped. Sell the house? Our home? Option B, I continued, ignoring him. You sign a 6-month lease agreement to rent back the house at current market value, a high one. Simultaneously, you will sign a legally binding document formally admitting to the unauthorized use of my identity. At the end of the 6 months, you vacate the property unconditionally. The silence in the room was absolute. It was Lauren who broke. The facade of the polished, aggressive lawyer crumpled, replaced by the raw, panicked vulnerability of a child. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with real, uncontrolled sobs. The first time I had ever witnessed genuine emotional collapse from her. I knew, she choked out, her voice muffled. I knew Mom used your signature, but she promised me it was just temporary. She said, your sister will make more money soon. She owes the family this. They built everything, my whole career, on what they took from you. The truth was laid bare. Lauren wasn't entirely innocent, but a willing participant in the system of entitlement her parents had built, where I was the guaranteed resource. I stood up, resting my hands on the table. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. Family does not use signatures behind backs, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the glass room. Family does not fabricate stories about their daughter being homeless to gain sympathy. From this day forward, we no longer share a single financial equation. They signed option A, less out of remorse and more out of the sheer animal instinct for survival. They chose to be debt-free criminals rather than homeless debtors. As the pen scratched the paper, the power shifted completely. The person who had been told to leave the table and go live in the streets now held the deed to the entire foundation of their respectable lives. The house was mine. The meeting was adjourned. The clock had run out. 6 months after the chilling confrontation in the Chicago conference room, the title deed to the sprawling house in Carmel had officially and legally passed to the subsidiary company under my command. Mark and Diane Stanton were gone. They had moved into a small, rented condominium in a less fashionable neighboring town, forced to downsize their lives and their pride simultaneously. Lauren, stripped of the fraudulent seed money and facing the true cost of operating her own business, had drastically scaled back her ambitions and was struggling to claw her way out of debt. The system of privilege and entitlement the family had constructed had finally imploded under the weight of its own reckless greed. The former Stanton residence was not demolished, nor was it preserved as a monument to their failed aspirations. I chose to transform it into something entirely new, something rooted in utility and the exact opposite of what the house once represented. Over 4 months of renovation, the elegant dining room where I was once criticized for my posture became a high-speed coding lab. The pristine sunroom where Diane held her tea parties was converted into a co-working space for local youth. The house became the Stanton Launch House, a nonprofit center dedicated to providing local youth with free training in e-commerce automation, marketing, and foundational coding skills. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn day when the new sign was erected. It was simple, modern, and boldly displayed the new name, the Stanton Launch House. I stood on the public sidewalk. the exact spot where I had once been told to leave my entire past behind. Around me were the first cohort of 15 young people, nervous, excited, clutching notebooks and old laptops, ready to begin the 3-month intensive program. My phone had vibrated earlier that morning. It was an email from Kara, notifying me that Mark and Diane would arrive at 11:30 in the morning, as prearranged, to collect the final box of stored family memorabilia from the garage, the last official connection to the house. They arrived precisely on time, pulling up in an older, less polished sedan than the luxury cars they once drove. They looked smaller, diminished. The air around them was heavy with the brittle tension of having lost not just a home, but a foundational myth. Diane was the first to speak, her eyes fixed on the new signpost. The name Stanton carved into the elegant wood. She seized on the name with desperate hope. "Brielle," she said, her voice thin, a fragile attempt at the old maternal authority. "You kept the name. You named the place after us. Does this mean you've forgiven us? That you still want us to be a family?" I looked at the house, then back at her. The answer was measured and calm. "I kept the name," I explained gently. "Not for you, Mom. I kept it for the dozens of kids who are going to walk through this door. Kids who grew up being told by their families that they weren't worth the space they took up. I kept the name to show them that a family name, a name that was once used to put me down and control my life, can still be connected to something genuinely good, something that serves others. Forgiveness is irrelevant. I repurposed the legacy." Mark, ever the indignant patriarch, stepped forward, his face hardening into its familiar mask of moral superiority. "You destroyed this family. Brielle, you could have just waived the signature. You could have let us fix it. Instead, you partnered with that vulture fund and seized your own father's home." "I destroyed nothing, Dad," I replied, looking directly into his eyes. "You destroyed your own credit and your own ethics. I simply stopped allowing myself to be your unlimited, invisible line of credit and your perpetual guarantee against the consequences of your own bad decisions. The house came down because of the fraud you committed, not the honesty I applied to the situation." Before Mark could escalate, the perfect, necessary interruption occurred. 3 of the young men from the first cohort, holding their backpacks, approached me excitedly, bypassing my parents entirely. "Ms. Stanton, sorry to interrupt," one young man named Josh said, his voice enthusiastic. "We just wanted to confirm if the free laptop exchange is still on today. I really need a reliable machine to start learning Python." I turned to them, the genuine, unforced smile that had been reserved only for my closest friends spreading across my face. "Absolutely, Josh. The refurbished laptops are waiting inside, and we'll start the Python fundamentals after lunch. Come on in. I'll show you your new workspace." As I turned to lead the excited, hopeful group toward the front door, Mark muttered, his voice defeated but still clinging to the original insult. It was a faint, almost inaudible whisper, the final gasp of his control. "We told you to go live in the streets." I paused, one hand on the freshly painted front door of the launch house, and looked back at him one last time. "Yes, Dad," I finished, the words carrying the full, satisfying weight of the last 10 years of struggle and success. "I did. I went out into the world you drove me into, and then I bought the street itself, so that every other child you and people like you tried to push out will have a way back in. You no longer get to decide where I belong." With that, I pushed open the door and walked inside, the sound of the first cohort's laughter echoing through the halls of what was once my cage and was now my greatest triumph. Behind me, Mark and Diane stood on the curb, suddenly small and utterly irrelevant, watching their past transform into a future they had no part in. There was no hug, no reconciliation, only a clear, final boundary and the sound of a new life beginning. The final image I have is walking into the main workspace, the afternoon sun, the same golden light that once filtered through the windows of my childhood home, now streamed through the glass, illuminating the complex flowcharts on the wall, the schematic for the next 5 years of my non-profit foundation. I had not just survived the fall, I had turned the fall into the foundation, transforming their curse into my declaration of total sovereignty. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you're enjoying Lila Revenge Stories, please let me know where you're listening from in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.